The Galactic Council Invasion, Part 1. The morning sky above Montana stretched endlessly blue when the first ships appeared. Sarah Chun had been tracking elk movements through her rifle scope when the shadows fell across the mountainside. She lowered her weapon and squinted upward, watching massive shapes blot out the sun. The ships moved with impossible silence, their hulls gleaming like polished obsidian against the bright sky dot in the valley below. Her radio crackled with confused chatter from the hunting lodge. Voices overlapped in panic and disbelief. Sarah adjusted her position behind the fallen log and raised her binoculars. The ships were enormous, each one easily the size of a city block. They moved in perfect formation, descending slowly toward the populated areas below. Sarah had spent 12 years as a Marine Corps sniper before retiring to these mountains. She recognized military precision when she saw it. This was not first contact between peaceful civilizations. This was an invasion, 3,000 light-years away. On the gleaming capital world of Zephyria, the Galactic Council chamber buzzed with confident discussion. Ambassador Crixnine stood before the assembled representatives, his crystalline form reflecting the chamber's soft lighting. The holographic display behind him showed Earth in devastating detail. "Fellow council members," Crixnine began, his voice resonating through translation devices. "The primitive world designated as Terra 3 has been thoroughly analyzed. Our preliminary surveys confirm what we expected. The dominant species shows remarkable potential for manual labor, but lacks any meaningful military capability." A rumble of approval rippled through the chamber. The Vorthak representative, a massive insectoid creature with 4 arms and compound eyes, clicked his mandibles approvingly. "The energy readings from their weapons are pathetic," he buzzed. "Their most powerful explosives barely register on our sensors." Crixnine gestured to the hologram, which zoomed in to show various human settlements. "Precisely. Their largest population centers are unshielded and vulnerable. Their military forces use chemical propellants in primitive projectile weapons. They have no energy shields, no plasma weapons, and their fastest aircraft cannot even break their own planetary gravity well consistently." The Council had spent months debating what to do about Earth. The planet sat in a strategically valuable location along several trade routes, and its abundant natural resources made it highly desirable. More importantly, the human population could provide an enormous workforce for the councils. Expanding industrial needs. "The invasion force is already prepared," continued Crixnine. 10,000 of our finest shock troops, equipped with energy weapons and personal force fields. Each soldier could theoretically eliminate hundreds of these humans before requiring resupply. Our battle computers estimate total planetary subjugation within 72 standard hours. The Melody representative, a graceful being of pure energy contained within a crystalline shell, pulsed with concern. "Are we certain this is necessary? Perhaps diplomatic contact would prove more beneficial." A harsh laugh echoed from the Bruthen section. General Vex 7, his armored carapace scarred from a dozen campaigns, stood to address the chamber. "These creatures barely understand interplanetary travel. They possess no technology that could threaten our forces. We have conquered 17 worlds with similar development levels. This will be no different." The vote was unanimous except for the Melody abstention. 10,000 troops would be more than sufficient to secure the planet and begin processing its inhabitants for workforce integration. Back on Earth, Sarah watched through her scope as the first landing craft touched down in the valley. The ships were sleek and alien, with no visible engines or exhaust. They simply descended as if gravity meant nothing to them. Landing ramps extended from their hulls, and figures began emerging. Even at this distance, Sarah could see they were not human. Some walked upright but moved too smoothly as if they weighed nothing. Others skittered on multiple legs. A few seemed to float rather than walk. All of them carried weapons that hummed with energy she could feel in her bones. The radio chatter had turned to screaming now. The lodge was under attack. Sarah had positioned herself on the ridge, specifically because it provided overwatch for the entire valley. Old habits died hard, and she had spent every hunting season for the past 5 years, unconsciously choosing positions that would be tactically advantageous. Now she found herself in the perfect spot to observe humanity's first battle against alien invaders. The invaders moved with ruthless efficiency. They spread out from their landing sites in precise formation, weapons sweeping back and forth as they advanced toward the human settlements. When they encountered resistance, their weapons fired beams of coherent energy that reduced trees, vehicles, and buildings to smoking craters. Sarah watched a group of local hunters try to mount a defense from behind their trucks. Their hunting rifles cracked sharply in the mountain air. She saw the bullets strike the alien soldiers and simply bounce off as if they were wearing invisible armor. The return fire vaporized the trucks and everyone behind them in seconds. Through her rifle scope, Sarah studied the enemy soldiers more carefully. They moved like they had never encountered serious opposition. Their formations were textbook perfect but predictable. They advanced in straight lines, never varying their approach or seeking proper cover. Why would they? Their previous conquests had probably involved overwhelming, primitive societies that had no chance against energy weapons and force fields, but Sarah had learned different lessons in the mountains of Afghanistan. She had spent months hunting insurgents who had nothing but bolt-action rifles and improvised explosives, yet who had held off the most advanced military in human history for decades. Technology was important, but it was not everything. The key insight came when she watched one of the alien soldiers pause to examine a fallen tree. The creature reached out with one hand to touch the bark, and for just a moment Sarah saw the shimmer around its body flicker. The force field was not constant. It required conscious activation or had limited duration. Sarah began tracking individual soldiers, looking for patterns. The tall, crystalline ones seemed to have the strongest shields but moved slowly. The insectoid creatures were faster, but their shields flickered more frequently. The floating energy beings appeared to be officers, staying back from direct combat while directing the others. More ships continued landing throughout the day. Sarah counted at least 50 vessels, each disgorging hundreds of troops. The invasion force was massive, far larger than anything needed to conquer a few mountain towns. This was clearly just the beginning of a planetary assault. As evening approached, Sarah realized she had observed something the aliens had not considered. They were treating Earth like every other primitive world they had conquered. They expected token resistance that could be crushed by overwhelming technological superiority. They had no conception of what humans were capable of when properly motivated. The radio had gone quiet hours ago. Sarah assumed the lodge and nearby settlements had been overrun. She was probably the only free human in a 100-mile radius, and soon the invaders would begin expanding their perimeter. They would find her eventually, but Sarah had advantages the aliens did not understand. She knew this terrain better than anyone alive. She had spent years learning every game trail, every blind, every position that offered concealment and clear fields of fire. She knew where to find water, where to cache supplies, and how to move through these mountains without being detected. More importantly, Sarah understood something about warfare that the aliens had apparently never learned. Technology could provide overwhelming advantages, but wars were won by adapting faster than your enemy. The aliens had better weapons and better armor, but they were following a predetermined plan against an enemy they did not understand. Sarah had spent the entire day studying them. Now she knew their movement patterns, their formation preferences, and the limitations of their equipment. She knew which weapons they favored and how they responded to threats. She had identified their officers and their communication protocols. The aliens knew nothing about her. As darkness fell across the Montana mountains, Sarah began moving to a new position. She had identified a site overlooking the main alien encampment, a place where the terrain would force enemy patrols to move through predictable channels. She would need to be closer for what she planned to do next. The aliens had energy weapons and force fields. They had superior numbers and advanced technology. They probably had orbital support and reinforcements available on demand. But Sarah had something they had never encountered before. She had 12 years of experience hunting the most dangerous prey in the universe. Humans who were shooting back as she settled into her new hide site and began preparing her equipment. Sarah could not help but smile grimly. The Galactic Council had made a critical error in judgment. They had assumed that technological superiority guaranteed victory. They were about to learn why humanity had spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of warfare. The aliens had brought 10,000 troops to conquer Earth, but they had never faced a human sniper who had nowhere left to retreat. Tomorrow, Sarah would begin teaching them why that was a mistake they would never have the chance to repeat. The war for Earth was the Galactic Council invasion. Part 2. Dawn broke cold and clear over the Montana mountains. Sarah had been in position for 3 hours, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air as she studied the alien encampment through her rifle scope. The invaders had established their base in the valley floor, their ships arranged in a perfect defensive circle that would have been impressive against any conventional military force. But Sarah was not a conventional military force she had chosen. Her position with the patience of a predator. The ridge offered multiple escape routes while providing clear lines of sight to the alien command structure. More importantly, the morning sun would be at her back, making her nearly invisible to anyone looking up from the valley floor. Through her scope, Sarah watched the aliens begin their daily operations. The crystalline beings she had identified as officers moved between the various species, issuing orders through devices that glowed with soft light. The insectoid soldiers formed up in precise ranks, while the floating energy creatures hovered above them, like shepherds watching their flocks. Sarah had spent the night planning her approach. Direct confrontation was suicide. Even if she could penetrate their force fields, 10,000 enemy soldiers would overwhelm her position in minutes. But warfare was about more than firepower. It was about psychology, momentum, and making your enemy believe they could lose. The aliens moved like conquerors who had never tasted defeat. They were confident, relaxed, and completely unprepared for what was about to happen to them. Sarah identified her target through careful observation. One of the floating energy beings remained stationary near the center of the camp, surrounded by a cluster of communication equipment that hummed with alien technology. The creature was clearly directing operations across a wide area, probably coordinating with other invasion forces around the globe. The range was just over 800 meters. Well within Sarah's capabilities, she controlled her breathing and settled the crosshairs on her target. The alien command structure assumed they were fighting primitives with chemical weapons that could not penetrate their technology. They were about to learn the difference between advanced technology and human innovation. Sarah had spent years perfecting her marksmanship, but she had also spent years studying ballistics, wind patterns, and atmospheric conditions. She understood trajectory and bullet drop better than most physics professors. More importantly, she understood that the most advanced force field in the universe had to obey the same physical laws as everything else. The alien force fields were energy barriers designed to deflect or absorb incoming projectiles and energy weapons. But Sarah had noticed something during her observations. The shields flickered when they encountered unexpected inputs. They were programmed to respond to known threats, not to adapt to completely novel situations. Sarah's rifle fired a standard 7.62 millimeters round at approximately 2,800 feet per second. The bullet itself was nothing special, just copper and lead moving fast enough to punch through steel plate. But Sarah had made one critical modification. She fired. The bullet crossed the distance in just over 1 second, arriving before the sound of the gunshot. It struck the floating alien center mass, and for a moment nothing seemed to happen. The force field shimmered and began to flare as it attempted to deflect the projectile, but Sarah had wrapped her bullet in a thin layer of iron, taken from the meteorite collection at the local geology museum. Iron was common throughout the universe, but the specific isotopic signature of terrestrial iron was unique to Earth's formation process. The alien shields had no programming to recognize or counter it. The bullet punched through the force, felt like it was not there, and struck the energy being in what Sarah assumed was its center of mass. The creature flared brilliant white for an instant, then collapsed like a deflated balloon. The effect on the alien camp was immediate and dramatic. Soldiers who had been moving in confident formation suddenly stopped and looked around in confusion. The crystal beings began rapid communication while the insectoid creatures scuttled toward cover that did not exist. Sarah was already moving. She had anticipated their response and planned her withdrawal route accordingly. As she slipped through the trees toward her next position, she could hear the alien camp erupting in activity behind her. They were scanning the ridgeline with energy weapons, turning the mountainside into a light show of destructive beams, but they were shooting at where she had been, not where she was going. The psychological impact of Sarah's shot rippled far beyond the immediate tactical situation. Across the valley, other alien units received reports that their commanding officer had been eliminated by an unknown weapon. For the first time since the invasion began, the aliens experienced something they had never felt before: uncertainty. On the Galactic Council flagship orbiting Earth, Admiral Zek Prime studied the initial reports with growing confusion. His bridge officers, a mix of species representing the finest military minds in the galaxy, stared at their displays in disbelief. "Repeat the transmission," ordered Zek Prime, his forearms moving across multiple control surfaces simultaneously. The communication officer, a nervous Trilaxian with large compound eyes, activated the playback. "Ground Command reports Colonel Vex-9 eliminated by unknown projectile weapon. Force field integrity was compromised. No energy signature detected. Requesting immediate reinforcement and updated tactical assessment." The bridge fell silent. Colonel Vex-9 was a veteran of 17 planetary conquests, equipped with the most advanced personal defense systems the Council could provide. His shields could deflect anything from plasma artillery to nuclear explosions. The idea that a primitive chemical weapon could penetrate them was impossible. "Analysis?" demanded Zek Prime. The tactical officer, a crystalline being similar to those on the ground, flowed forward. "Admiral, preliminary data suggests the projectile possessed unusual characteristics. The energy signature was negligible, but the penetration capability exceeded all known parameters for chemical weapons of this technological level." Zek Prime considered this information. The Council had conquered hundreds of worlds. They had faced energy weapons, particle beams, and even crude nuclear devices. But they had never encountered a species that could modify simple projectiles to defeat advanced shielding technology. Could this be a fluke? Some kind of technological anomaly? Possible, Admiral. However, the precision of the attack suggests deliberate targeting. The shot was fired from extreme range under difficult atmospheric conditions. This indicates advanced training and equipment. Zek Prime made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his career. Increase ground forces by 50%. Deploy advanced reconnaissance units. If these humans have developed unexpected capabilities, we must identify and counter them immediately. Back on the mountainside, Sarah monitored alien communications through a handheld scanner she had purchased for tracking wildlife. The device could not translate their languages, but the increased radio chatter and frantic tone told her everything she needed to know. The aliens were no longer confident. She spent the next 6 hours systematically stalking individual patrols. Sarah had learned patience in Afghanistan, where a single shot could trigger a manhunt lasting weeks. She knew how to move through hostile territory without being detected, how to identify targets of opportunity, and most importantly, how to disappear after making contact. The aliens had technology, but they lacked fundamental understanding of guerrilla warfare. They moved in predictable patterns, failed to vary their routes, and clustered together in ways that made them vulnerable to a skilled marksman. They were fighting the war they expected, not the war they faced. Sarah's second target was an insectoid scout moving through a narrow canyon. The creature carried sophisticated scanning equipment and was clearly mapping the terrain for future operations. Sarah waited until it moved into a natural choke point where the canyon walls would prevent escape. This time, she aimed for the scanning device rather than the alien itself. The modified bullet destroyed the equipment in a shower of sparks and left the creature stranded without its primary sensor array. More importantly, it sent another message to the alien command structure: humans could strike anywhere, at any time. With weapons that could penetrate their defenses, the third shot eliminated a communication relay that connected the Valley Force with their orbital support. Sarah had identified the device by watching which aliens checked it most frequently and how they positioned themselves around it. The destruction of the relay cut the ground forces off from real-time intelligence and reinforcement coordination. By evening, the entire alien operation in the valley had ground to a halt. Units that had been aggressively advancing toward human settlements had pulled back to defensive positions. Patrols that had ranged across miles of territory were now hugging the base perimeter. The invasion force had been reduced from 10,000 attackers to 10,000 targets waiting for the next shot to fall. The psychological transformation was remarkable. Alien soldiers who had conquered worlds now jumped at shadows. Officers who had planned the subjugation of an entire planet were now afraid to expose themselves long enough to coordinate their forces effectively. Sarah understood that her The Galactic Council Invasion, Part 3. The third day of the invasion dawned with an eerie silence hanging over the Montana Valley. Sarah had spent the night moving between carefully prepared positions, each one offering unique advantages for the campaign she was about to wage. The aliens had been forced to consolidate their forces into a defensive perimeter, abandoning their original mission of territorial expansion, but Sarah knew the situation was far from stable. Orbital reinforcements would arrive eventually, and when they did, the aliens would adapt their tactics to counter her threat. She had a narrow window of opportunity to accomplish something that had never been done before: force an entire galactic military force to retreat through the actions of a single individual. The breakthrough came when Sarah intercepted an alien communication burst that her scanner could partially decode. The signal was being transmitted on multiple frequencies simultaneously, suggesting it was extremely important. More significantly, the transmission was being repeated in what appeared to be mathematical progressions that could represent coordinates. Sarah realized the aliens were calling for help through careful observation. She identified the transmission source as a heavily shielded communication array positioned in the center of the alien base. The device was surrounded by no fewer than 50 guards from multiple species, all equipped with the most advanced weapons and armor she had yet seen. Destroying it would require her to penetrate deeper into enemy territory than she had ever attempted, but Sarah had learned something crucial during her years as a military sniper. The most heavily defended targets were usually the most important ones. If the aliens were protecting that communication array with such overwhelming force, its destruction would cripple their entire operation. The approach required skills Sarah had developed through years of hunting both animals and humans in hostile territory. She moved during the pre-dawn hours when alien visual systems were least effective, using terrain features and natural camouflage to mask her approach. The aliens had sensors that could detect heartbeats and body heat, but they had calibrated them for expected human movement patterns and gathering points. Sarah moved like a wolf stalking prey, never following predictable paths and never maintaining consistent speed or direction. She used techniques learned from both military training and years of solitary hunting, becoming part of the landscape rather than moving through it. The final approach took her through a dry creek bed that led directly to the alien perimeter. Sarah had identified this route by studying water runoff patterns and realizing that the aliens had overlooked the tactical significance of seasonal drainage systems. Their sensors were focused on obvious approach routes while ignoring natural features that could provide concealment. From her final position, Sarah could see the communication array clearly through her rifle scope. The device was unlike anything in human technology, appearing to bend light around itself while emitting a low harmonic vibration that she could feel in her bones. The guards around it moved in careful patterns, never allowing any single approach to remain Unobserved for more than a few seconds, Sarah spent 2 hours studying the guard rotation, looking for the inevitable gap that would appear when overconfident soldiers fell into routine patterns. The opportunity came when 3 guards converged to examine what appeared to be a malfunctioning sensor near the perimeter. For exactly 18 seconds. The eastern approach to the communication array would be UNWATHED. The shot required precision beyond anything Sarah had ever attempted. The range was over 1,000 meters through variable atmospheric conditions, requiring her to account for wind patterns, temperature gradients, and the unique gravitational effects created by the alien technology itself. The target was smaller than a human head and was partially obscured by energy fields that distorted visual targeting, but Sarah had advantages the aliens could not comprehend. She understood the physics of projectile motion better than most engineers. She had spent years compensating for variables that would have confounded lesser marksmen. Most importantly, she had the patience to wait for the perfect moment when all factors aligned in her favor. The modified bullet struck the communication array's primary control node with surgical precision. The device's energy fields collapsed in a cascade of brilliant light, followed by a series of secondary explosions that destroyed backup systems throughout the alien base. The harmonic vibration ceased abruptly, leaving a silence that felt louder than any explosion. The effect on the alien forces was immediate and catastrophic. Without their primary communication link, individual units began operating independently based on their last received orders. Coordination between different species broke down as translation protocols failed. Most critically, the connection to orbital command was severed, leaving the ground forces isolated. And without strategic guidance, Sarah watched through her scope as the alien base descended into controlled chaos. Officers attempted to restore communication using backup systems, but each device Sarah had observed during her reconnaissance was systematically eliminated by follow-up shots. The aliens found themselves facing an opponent who had studied their technology and organization with scientific precision within 6 hours. The alien force began a fighting withdrawal toward their landing ships. But Sarah had anticipated this move and had spent the previous night preparing positions along their most likely retreat routes. The aliens discovered that their withdrawal was being contested by an enemy who seemed to be everywhere at once. The retreat became a running battle across terrain that favored the defender. Sarah used the mountainous landscape to force the aliens into predictable channels where her knowledge of local conditions provided overwhelming advantages. She struck command elements, destroyed equipment, and eliminated key personnel with shots that seemed to come from impossible angles. But the most devastating blow came when Sarah realized the true scope of her tactical situation. The aliens were not just retreating from her immediate area. Similar reports were coming in from around the globe as other humans began to understand what was happening and started their own resistance campaigns. Sarah had done something the aliens had never experienced. She had provided an example that others could follow around the world. Humans were adapting her techniques and applying them to their local situations. Hunters in Alaska were using similar modifications to defeat alien force fields. Military personnel who had survived the initial assault were implementing guerrilla tactics that the aliens could not counter. Scientists and engineers were analyzing captured alien technology and finding weaknesses that could be exploited with conventional human weapons. The psychological impact rippled through the entire Galactic Council fleet. Admiral Zek Prime found himself facing reports of human resistance from every continent on Earth. His forces, which had been designed to overwhelm primitive civilizations through technological superiority, were being systematically defeated by opponents who refused to fight according to expected parameters. The breakthrough moment came when captured alien communications revealed the true nature of the Council's strategic doctrine. They had conquered 17 worlds using identical tactics, overwhelming each civilization before it could adapt to their technology. The entire Council military machine was built on the assumption that primitive species would be paralyzed by technological shock and unable to mount effective resistance, but humans had been fighting technologically superior opponents for their entire history. Every major conflict had featured underdog forces finding ways to defeat better-equipped enemies through innovation, adaptation, and sheer determination. The aliens had unknowingly challenged the most experienced guerrilla fighters in the galaxy. The turning point came when Sarah intercepted a transmission from the alien flagship ordering a complete withdrawal from Earth. The message was broadcast on all frequencies, ensuring that every human resistance cell would receive it. Admiral Zek Prime was abandoning the invasion after suffering casualties that exceeded anything in Council military history. Sarah watched from her mountain-high sight as the alien ships lifted off from the valley floor. The vessels that had arrived with such confidence were now departing in hasty formation, their perfect military precision replaced by the urgency of a rooted force. She had accomplished something that should have been impossible, forcing a galactic military power to retreat through the actions of a single individual. But Sarah understood that her victory was about more than marksmanship or tactical innovation. She had proven something far more important to both humans and aliens: that technological superiority did not guarantee victory, that the will to resist could overcome any advantage, and that one person with the courage to fight could inspire an entire species to stand against tyranny. 3 months later, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session to address what they now called the Earth Incident. The holographic displays showed damage assessments, casualty reports, and strategic analyses that painted a picture of military disaster on an unprecedented scale. Ambassador Crix-9 stood before the assembled representatives, his crystalline form dimmed with something resembling shame. Fellow council members, our assessment of the Terran species was fundame.